Welcome, everybody. We'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. Clerk, will you call the roll?
Agent,
Here.
Clegg,
Here.
Halliburton, Sanchez,
Here.
Thompson, Woodings,
Here.
all present.
Thank you. And next up, we've got interim budget changes. Looks like a quick presentation. Welcome. I can't, it sounds as though your mic's not on.
Is this better? There we go.
Yeah, that's better.
Madam Mayor, council members, good afternoon. Mike Chirac for Travis Black here. We have just one interim budget change we are seeking approval on today. And that deals with a capital project at Cottonwood Park. The project is in process and we've just run into some additional costs due to getting the new restroom hooked up to the sewer main and putting in some increased electrical infrastructure. So we're looking for an expenditure appropriation increase of 20,000, and then Parks should be able to complete that project hopefully in the next 30 days.
Madam Mayor?
Yeah.
I'd like to make a motion on this one, considering this is my favorite local park in the city of Boise. I would move approval.
Second.
We have a motion, second, any discussion? Hey, clerk.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Woodings,
Yes.
Agent,
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
all in favor, motion carries.
Thank you. And next up, it looks like we have Maria for a review of the results of the survey related to the Office of Police Accountability. Trying to
Pulling up a
share your
presentation.
screen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, council members. It's nice to see you all in person. I admit I'm a little nervous. It's my first in-person presentation to you all that's not on Zoom.
I just have a question. Can you all, is there something on this screen facing you all? Okay, because this one screen's not off. Does anybody need this one? Or is council good with? Okay, great, we're good.
Perfect. So Madam Mayor, council members, after the second reading of the ordinance proposing a new model of police oversight, you asked us to do an initial kind of dip our toes in the pool of how the community was feeling about the general concept of civilian police oversight. So that's what we did with a survey that we put in the field, put out to the community right after that council meeting. This is really an initial touch point just to inform what a new model of police oversight could look like. We didn't ask a lot of specific policy questions. It was much more a dipping our toes in the pool to see what the community knows about civilian police oversight, how the community feels about civilian police oversight, whether or not folks have had an opportunity to interact with the current model, the current office, and what the community would be looking for moving forward in a model of civilian police oversight. So we had 828 responses, 732 were Boise residents. So as is our usual, when we present the results to you, we filter by Boise residents so that you get a clear understanding of what our constituents are feeling. The responses were gathered between May 26th and June 16th. We presented it in both English and Spanish. We have really fantastic translators that we use that do a really great job of that. And we advertised it through various channels. You all did a great job on your social media channels and accounts. We did that multiple times and through several of our different accounts. Our internal and external newsletters. We worked closely with relationship managers throughout the city to share it with community partners to get it as deep into the community as possible. And through at least one press release, we did try to push it out a few different times to get as many responses as possible. What we weren't able to do and what we're waiting to do until the new model is affirmed by the council and we have a director on board is to go deeper into that community engagement to get even more feedback, particularly from communities that may or may not have as easy access to digital ways of interacting with us. So once a new director is on board, and you'll see at the end of the presentation, we'll work with that person to really build out community meetings, listening sessions, particularly with those communities that may have less comfortable relationships with police officers than other communities that we typically see participate in surveys. Some quick demographics just so that you can see I think the last time I was before you, we were doing survey results on our BPD survey. We did have about 100 more respondents to this survey than we did the former. And you'll see these demographics skew just a little bit older. In the original BPD survey, we had a lot more folks between 25 and 44. This was a more equal distribution between 35 and 65 plus. Still have a tough time getting folks under 25 to participate in our survey projects, but we're working on it. Gender, pretty evenly split. This was the first time that we offered no answer as an option there. Race and ethnicity averages out approximately to city demographics. So the first question we asked, just to get a very baseline take on what the community feeling is, how important do you think civilian police oversight is to our community? So really telling here, if you add extremely important and very important, about 63% of the community is saying that this is a valuable program to have available within our community. I mean, 22%ish, 23%ish, not so important or not at all important. But I think we can see a very clear view from the community that they see this as a valuable thing to add to our community. The themes, of course, and it was really interesting to read through the comments. Just like last time, I've got pages and pages and pages of comments. I'm happy to send them to you for you to read through. They're really interesting and they really are at the heart of what our community members are feeling. But for example, one resident said, you know, I've lived in Boise for 20 years and I've never had to access police oversight, but I would want to know that it was there. And if somebody needed it, we need to make sure that we have it in place. And that was a really common theme. So even folks who didn't know or think that they would ever need to access civilian police oversight felt like it was an important role in a democratic society, that transparency, accountability, making sure that there was a way to lodge a complaint if you needed to lodge a complaint. All of those things were very important. Checks and balances came up a lot. Overarchingly, folks thought it was important, with the exception of maybe that 23% that were like, we don't think so much. We thought it was also important to ask how familiar our community is with the current model, the Office of Police Oversight, in part because we really want to make sure we have a good baseline as we move forward and work with the community on more awareness about how to access civilian police oversight so that we know what we're shooting for. And if you think about this, how familiar are you from extremely familiar, those that have had interactions with the current Office of Police Oversight, to not at all familiar, being people who didn't even know we had it at all? I think we would want this to look more like a bell curve, right? We would want extremely familiar and not at all familiar to be pretty similar, and then have the high point in the middle. So extremely familiar meant that you had had some sort of interaction with, or you had a strong knowledge of the current model, the Office of Police Oversight. Very familiar meant that you had heard of it, knew its function, knew what it did. Somewhat familiar was like, oh, I think I've heard of it. And not at all familiar was like, I had no idea we even had an Office of Police Oversight. So we're feeling like this gives us a very good baseline so that as we continue to work with the community on education, on awareness, as the new model takes shape, this can be a question we can ask again. And hopefully we'll be able to see that more in that bell curve so that the community really knows that it exists, how to access it if they need it. We also asked, where are you most likely to go for information to access police oversight if you need it? And I truncated these questions just a little bit. We have, obviously, I can send you the raw results and you can have the full questions. The caveat to this is, remember that we distributed the survey digitally. So you're going to see folks that are most comfortable with accessing information online. So far and away, people rely a lot on the City of Boise website and on internet searches to get information, especially those who engage with the city through our digital channels. And we saw that come out really clearly in these survey results. We also, though, asked if they would ask trusted friends or colleagues, elected officials, nonprofit organizations. And as part of our outreach effort, once the office is established, I think we'll really dig into some of those additional ways of getting to members of the community, particularly those who maybe aren't on the website or aren't on social media, to make sure that our community partners, especially those that work with our most vulnerable populations, have the information they need to be able to provide people with knowledge about civilian police oversight in Boise. We also then asked where the community thought we should be advertising. They were allowed to choose as many answers as made sense to them. So you can see across the board, and we know this about human beings in today's day and age, people like to get information from lots of different places. And so it's incumbent upon us to present information in lots of different places. So these are scored and ranked according to like how they related to each other. Social media, coming in really strong. But also if you look here, when we ask the question about where do you think we should advertise the new Office of Police Accountability, community groups rose really high to the top. So that's an incredible opportunity for a new director and new staff to partner with our Office of Community Engagement to really build relationships and work with community organizations to get the information about the office out. We asked about what kind of form of contact would be most comfortable. We know that those who need to access civilian police oversight are typically it's not always comfortable, right? So we want to make sure that whatever we're doing for folks who need to access these services, we're providing the most comfortable, easiest points of entry. Email came up number one, phoning the director, high on the list, a web form, high on the list. And then also in person. So we'll make sure that as that's building out and as a new director is working through policies and regulations, that we're presenting the information and saying, hey, look, like let's have multiple entry points, each as easy and comfortable as any other entry point, because the whole point of it is for folks to be able to access the service. We also asked about the importance of anonymity. And this one was really interesting because if you look at extremely important, how important is it to be able to make a complaint anonymously? About 50% of people said extremely to very important, and another 15% saying somewhat important. One thing to note here is in the comments, we did see a request for anonymity, not only for people making complaints, but there was a desire within some of the comments to make sure that we were also providing protection for police officers who are having complaints lodged against them. So like an equal kind of a balance, definitely more towards the side of making sure that there was anonymity for folks who might have a complaint, but making sure that we also had some protection for police officers in that process. So definitely something a new director is going to have to do some balancing about, and that you all, as you're thinking through regulations, can do some balancing on. If you were someone you cared about and needed to file a complaint, would you feel comfortable? 61.6% of folks said yes. So that's a great place to start, but we really should focus in on the people who said no or not sure, and think about the complaints or the concerns that they may be having. And they were loud and clear and pretty consistent. So when we asked people, if you said no or unsure to being comfortable about a complaint, what would they need to feel comfortable? And we heard a lot of what probably we all feel in our guts, the ability to be anonymous, to make sure that there would be no retaliation or no repercussions, no retribution. We want to make sure that we're not like starting to be pulled over. We want to make sure that there would actually be a process in place, transparency about what that process would look like, and transparency about how the information would be used, when we would be getting information back. The community really said loud and clear, if I make a complaint, I want to know what happens to it. What is the process? Where does it go? Am I going to be told when there's a resolution or what that resolution looks like? And a big call to make sure that the complaint was taken seriously, that they would hear back from the office to say, we got your complaint, we're working through it, here's where it is in the process, and regular communication back, and then what the resolution of that was. We asked too, knowing that we were, in terms of the community's awareness of the office, that we need to do a better job about that. We asked about what kind of information would give the community confidence that our model of police oversight is working well. And again, there was real consistency in the themes that we saw here. And it was to be as public and transparent about the information as possible. A lot of regular reporting. Some folks wanted quarterly reporting, twice a year, yearly, but very regular reporting, very good information in the press when complaints are filed and what those resolutions are, really good, clear, transparent information about the number of complaints, the types of complaints, so categories of complaints, the process for the investigations, where things are in the investigation, and then actions taken. There was like, the comments are really all over the board, and I would encourage you to read them, because some folks said, it's not that I necessarily want people to be punished, but I do want to know that something has happened, or what has happened, or that a complaint has been closed. Even if a complaint is found to be unfounded, we want to know that. We just want to know what that resolution is actually going to look like, and then see some of the statistics that go along with that. Are all of the complaints being dismissed? Are all of the complaints being coming to some sort of an action being taken? Like, what does that actually look like, so that the community can gauge and judge for themselves to make sure that that's working right? There were several comments asking for disaggregated data. I think the major theme here is the community wants us to trust them to see data and draw their own conclusions, in addition to the conclusions that we draw from the data that we look at. And then any trends that the data is showing. The community just wants a real clear conversation about that, and then to know what the city is doing in response to those trends. So if we're seeing something happen over and over and over again, a particular kind of complaint, maybe a particular individual that's getting a lot of complaints, the community wants to see that the city is handling those and responding to those. So it's simple stuff, but I think it's some really good stuff that we can work on, and some good information. So our next steps through the Office of Community Engagement, I think when you saw on the first and the second reading, we're going to be partnering really closely with OPA and the new director. We will provide that person as soon as they are selected and seated with these survey results, and a deeper dive if they wish, and assume that they will want to read all the comments as we have, and then really working with them to develop an outreach plan to key community members to learn more. To have conversations with folks who didn't participate in the survey, who may be comfortable in smaller group conversations with a trusted partner, a trusted leader that would be willing to facilitate some of those conversations, so that we can round out the information that we have and make sure that we're really hearing from the folks that may be the most hesitant about accessing civilian police oversight. We are looking to develop partnerships with community organizations and a really regular calendar of both meetings and presentations, knowing that it's going to be important to get out as deeply into the community as we can and beyond our digital channels. Updating our website with contact information and a web form. We're ready to do that like fairly quickly. Once the office is established, creating materials to distribute both digitally and throughout the community, thinking about places that we can put that information that it can be most available to our community members, and then reporting back results of any additional community engagement, both to the director and to you all, so that you can see what that deeper dive has looked like, and assuming that once we have a new director seated, there will be a few months of a process of continuing to iterate and put information in place. And with that, any questions?
Madam Mayor, thank you. Thank you, Maria. So a couple of things. The part where you talked about going deeper at some point, I strongly encourage us to look into Spanish language radio. That's a major resource, even though the rest of the world may have moved on to podcasts and that sort of thing. Spanish language radio is still a very good place to disseminate important information. And a lot of those DJs are they're informal leaders in our community, and people trust them with information. So that would be a good place. The other thing, the question about where, and I can't remember quite how it went, something about people had not really strong feelings either way about there being an Office of Police Oversight or Accountability. Can we do a deeper dive into that? Does that mean they have full trust of BPD and they don't think we need that? Or does that mean they don't trust the Office of Police Accountability or Oversight? Like, can we look at that a little bit deeper to see why they're blasé about that?
Let me look at that and see. I mean,
Okay.
As you would imagine, we have a broad range of folks in our community. So there were definitely survey respondents who said, this is not a good use of taxpayer money. We don't understand why we need this. We haven't heard complaints. So why would we need this? want to be transparent about the fact that there was that theme there. Let me see if we can tease that out. And thank you, Council Pro Tem Sanchez, about the Spanish language radio. It's a really valuable asset.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor. Thanks, Maria. I really appreciate this information. As you know, we've got the ordinance on our agenda tonight. It's typical with ordinances like these, especially ones that have changed significantly, that we'll ask for a review of the ordinance. And it sounds like with these next steps that you're identifying here, that it would be, I think, reasonable to ask for that review to also come back with some of this information. So my question is, 6 months enough time to do that so that we could ask for a 6-month review of the ordinance and then at that same time bring back some of the information from these next steps that you've identified?
Thank you, Council President. I think it is, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll jump in here. I think that's a perfect way to do it because what we had wanted to do was ensure that once, as Maria had said too, once there's a director, we've done this first batch, we're going to dig deeper into what the public wants, really look to them to set the regulations, that kind of the rules, the expectations that we'll have for reporting, so that it's not all embedded in an ordinance, but instead it's policies and procedures for the council to weigh in on.
Perfect.
Madam Mayor, just to kind of tag on that, thank you, Maria. And now I'm curious if there's a way, almost like an exit survey for people who actually access the Office of Police Accountability. How was your experience? What could we do better? How might we be able to change the process so that you have a better experience with this office? I think that data could be really valuable too, as we're going through fine tuning an ordinance and making sure that it's actually serving the folks. And I feel like there's probably a way to kind of anonymize that so that it's not tied to a specific case, but just kind of goes into a pool so that we can look at those results.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, thank you. Maria, thank you for all that information. It was great. I really appreciated the statistics that 63% of the community believe that the OPA is extremely important or very important, and how that contrasts with the 68% of folks who are not familiar or only somewhat familiar with the current position. And then there's like a lot of opportunity, right, to do some great community outreach and to grow. My question, and maybe it was on the previous survey, but I was wondering if there was a question on this current survey that asked people where they would want to access it from a physical standpoint. I thought there was a question that asked like where it should be located to be most convenient for people, whether it was at like City Hall West in its own location or at City Hall. Am I misremembering that? I thought there was a geographical location question on the survey.
I think we had considered asking not geographical location, but the importance of being able to access it from a door that was not in a government building, which is where the current office is located. We didn't ask that question. I could make a guess that's not specific to that question. There was a strong theme throughout it of believing that civilian oversight is important because it needs separation from the actual police department itself. So I'm guessing if we gave people the option of like, would you like it at City Hall West? That probably would not have been the choice, but that's something that I think we can work into a further deeper dive, particularly with folks where it might be more difficult.
Great. Madam Mayor, just a quick follow-up. Yeah, thank you for the clarification there. Maybe it was an email I got, or maybe it was just a question that existed in my head somewhere, but I thought there was a geographical question. One of the answers on the survey was that people really wanted to be able to access it from the web. So that kind of talks to it a little bit, is that they don't necessarily want to have to go into a place where they feel unsafe, which is great because that can be created. And then the challenge really is when we have so much stuff on our City of Boise website to make sure it's super, super accessible for folks. And so just recognizing that may be a challenge, and that there's 68% of folks who are somewhat or very unfamiliar with what currently exists. I think we'll have to make a big effort if it does go on the website to really make sure that people know where to find that exact information, because even the search or wherever it may be tough to find. So thanks again for all the information, and I look forward for what's next.
Thank you, council member. And we will build out a pretty significant educational campaign that will likely include all kinds of ways to get people to drive them directly to where that is, and to provide community leaders, frankly, with the information so that if somebody comes to them, they can say, oh, look, you just go right here.
Madam Mayor. Maria, can you go back a couple of slides? There's a weighted word slide with what the public wanted. This is just kind of a note for us up here. When I look at this and the weight of the words, if I understand it correctly, at least this survey group was more concerned about the OPA process hurting them than it was with the effectiveness or the seriousness of the process administratively. In other words, complaint taken seriously, heard, public concerns, protection, confidential investigation, all are weighted smaller than anonymous trust, retribution, retaliation, et cetera. And so that's something that we all need to be mindful of as we help the public learn about the office that we're creating and also interact with it. It looks from this slide, if I understand it correctly, like there's real concern, not necessarily with the outcome of police conduct investigations on the police, but the outcome of police conduct investigations on the complainant. And that's just something that we should all be very sensitive to and pay attention to, at least based on this survey group and this slide, if I'm reading it right.
Yes, council member, that's exactly correct. And what was so interesting throughout the survey results were folks that said, even if I never have to access this, if I did, here's what I would want to make sure of, which was a really compassionate way to answer. And I think really indicative of the compassion of our community. But it came through loud and clear. People want to make sure that the complaint would be taken seriously and that they wouldn't suffer any retribution from making the complaint.
Madam Mayor, thank you. Maria, just to make that perfectly clear for the public, as it stands now, if somebody contacts this office to make a complaint, is that anonymous or do they have to give their information, identifying themselves?
I do not know the answer to that, but I can get it for you.
Okay, the reason I ask that is, I know at the Human Rights Commission, if you file a complaint, you have to give your information. You can't do it anonymously. So I don't know if that will differ in this situation or if it differs, but that's how it is.
All right. Well, thanks for the presentation. This was super informative. Really appreciate people taking the time to fill out the survey, but then your review of it to make it more accessible and understandable for all of us. And look forward to the next conversation that we have. And once we have the office confirmed by the council and the work being done to develop the processes to kind of respond to this, but then collect more information. Thanks. All right, next up, Jennifer, are you presenting? Great, okay. We've got Jennifer today to give us an overview really of the Southwest Barrett Boise area of impact and annexation. And, I want to welcome everybody that's here. Of course, welcome Jennifer too. And this is a topic that's been much discussed lately. And it's important to be clear that this is informational only today. We're not taking any action. This is something where Jennifer will be giving us a history of the area, things to be thinking about, things that we're considering, as well as next steps in a process. And I think it's very important not only to be clear that there's no action that we're asking the council to take today, but that also given this time, when we have the pressing needs that we have with regard to housing, we owe it to the residents of Boise to look at this fully and to do our due diligence on a potential trade, the use of land to meet the needs of residents in Boise. And this is the beginning of that. We'll talk about the history of the area tonight. We will have, we'll get feedback and have a discussion as a council and from the public when annexation is scheduled. And appreciate the conversations we've had so far. I know the council president has met with you. I am sorry we haven't yet, but we've got something scheduled. I've met with the president of Southwest Ada County Association, SWACA. I'm just going to call it SWACA. And we've heard from a lot of residents of the county and residents close to the area. And we appreciate that. We're taking all of that into account. And I also want to be clear that we're still waiting for an appraisal. So there's so much that still has to be done that we're looking at as we take into consideration how we meet the needs of Boise residents. Thanks, Jennifer. We can't, we were having trouble with it earlier.
How about now?
Nope,
Oh, there
here
we
we
go.
go.
Okay. Ooh.
It needed a little break.
It
I
did.
guess.
It's like, wow, you're going to use me for an hour. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Appreciate the comments. Jennifer Tomlinson, Park Superintendent. And just as a little bit of background, the reason why I'm presenting this is actually because I was in the Comprehensive Planning Division of the city for quite a number of years. So I transitioned over into the Parks Department, but as a long-range planner for PDS, I have a lot of, I guess, background information on kind of where we've been and where we are right now. So I'm just going to run through a few slides. I'm going to go over kind of the history of annexation, the status of the Southwest, what we look at as a city when we're looking at modeling annexation, and we're looking at our assumptions and what goes into that model. And I also asked Mike Schreck from DFA to be here. He's really the numbers guy on this thing, so he's the model guru. An overview of impact fees, and then some of the next steps that we're going to be going through potentially on the McGurdio parcel. So just as a little bit of background, Idaho State Code defines what an area of city impact is. It also defines factors that we need to consider when we're looking at that. Those include the trade area, geographic factors, and areas that can be reasonably expected to annex into the city in the future. On this map, the area in red is the Southwest area that is outside of our city limits. I made this map like 3 weeks ago before the Murillo Farms project was submitted to PDS, so the line doesn't exclude that project as it has just come into PDS. So just some quick facts about this area. We have about 34,000 people who live down there. Our average household size is about 2.87, which is a little bit bigger than our citywide average. And then just some other quick facts about some of the demographic information and some of the household income, per capita income, and education. So as we look at the history.
Sure, Jennifer.
Sure.
Sorry, if you could go back one. Question on the business activity. If I'm not mistaken, that's a little bit low for that many residents. Is that true?
Madam Mayor, Council President, it is low for that many residents, yes.
Okay. So it is primarily residential and business activity within the area is somewhat limited.
That's correct. We only have a couple of identified activity centers down there, like Lake Hazel and 5 Mile, and then a couple, I believe, along Victory.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So going back to the 70s, there was a lot of development that happened in the Southwest in this part of town. And this has always been under the county's jurisdiction. So a lot of development was happening on lots that were smaller than today we would ever allow septic tanks to be installed on. So there were septic tanks on parcels down to like a third or a quarter of an acre. We don't allow that in current development patterns now. Central District Health regulates that aspect of development. The county issued a moratorium on new development as there was some groundwater contamination as a result of the quantity of septic tanks down there. And they were really concerned about the lack of urban services and infrastructure down there. So in 1978, the Southwest was included in the area of city impact. So that's an area, as like on the first slide, that is, meets the criteria of the area of impact. But it was not included in the urban services planning area. So there was no studies done on providing an urban level of service in the area. In the 80s, the county actually asked the city to step in and start extending sewer to the area. So the city agreed, and we started allowing folks to connect to sewer down there. We don't currently, as practice, allow properties to connect to sewer outside of the city limits unless they meet 2 criteria: one, that their septic systems are failing, or that they have agreed to consent to annexation. So we have like 3 big issues: 1, sewer; 2, annexation consent; and then 3, just the level of urban services that we have in the area. So as a result of that, we prepared a master plan for existing and new development that went hand in hand with the Southwest planning area policies that were also developed. In the 90s, we completed a sewer master plan for the area, and we had two large areas that had widespread septic failure. So those were Countryman Estates and then Sherman Oaks. Sherman Oaks is just south of Molinar Park, and it's really hard to see where Countryman Estates is. It's south of Overland. And at the time, it was asked of Southwest residents if they would be interested in forming a separate sewer district, whereby they would manage the sewer assets out in the area, and they overwhelmingly said no. So the city's invested a good bit of funding in the area from the 70s into the 90s. And then in the late 90s, we completed a number of sewer extensions into the area, and those have all been approved by the county. So by the 90s, early 2000s, we were up to about 15 to 20,000 people who are being served by city sewer. And the city has invested over $10 million in the area. So the map on the screen is the area in red is the outline of the last annexation that we did in the Southwest. So it's about 6,000 residents, right around 2,000 parcels that we brought in, and that was in 2004. That triggered a number of lawsuits against the city for various reasons, but kind of as a result of that, the legislature did look at our annexation enabling legislation and did change it at that time. So at this time, consent was considered implied if somebody has hooked up to sewer. So the act of hooking up to sewer was considered consent to annex into the city limits. Once this annexation went forward, and in the 2008 legislative session, the legislature put in a new clause that said that consent has to be written for all annexation consent after 2008. So if a property has connected to sewer prior to 2008, then we are allowed to consider that implied consent. If it's after 2008, we have to have written consent. And the way that we achieve that is either through, on a subdivision plat, we'll have a note on it that says this, by subdividing this property, the city or whoever's subdividing it does agree to annexation into the city limits of Boise at any time that the city limits, or at any time that the city chooses to annex in this area. So since 2005.
So I have a question,
sure.
actually, Jennifer, sorry. Because that
was
predates
a
me,
lot.
this might be what Council President Clegg has talked about with the annexation. Was that the last annexation,
Yeah,
that 2008 one?
it was actually, you're saying 2004, I thought it was 2005.
It spanned, Council President Clegg, it spanned a couple of years. It took that long to get through the process, and then to get through the litigation process. I believe it took a good bit of time
And
as
so
well.
the city was only moving to annex those that were already on sewer service, city sewer service?
Madam Mayor, so we had the consent numbers that we needed to meet the criteria as outlined in state code. So I believe at that time we had 53% consent of all of the parcels that were in the area. So we have to have 50% plus one in order to be considered a consenting annexation.
And then the lawsuits followed by residents
Correct.
who had been
Annexed.
annexed, some of which were likely on city sewer.
Madam Mayor, I don't remember the disposition of all of the defendants, but that was one of the points of contention, was whether or not they had explicitly consented to annexation.
And that's why afterwards the legislature changed it and said, being provided with city sewer isn't reason enough for us to have consent.
Madam Mayor, that's correct.
Okay. Thanks.
Madam Mayor, since we stopped here, could I clarify something? So my memory of that hearing, we had at least one homeowners association president testifying against the annexation, despite the fact that the homeowners association CCNRs expressly said that they would not oppose the annexation. Is that enough to be considered consent? I know this was prior to 2008, but I believe we also required most of the HOAs, if they did agree to hook up to city sewer, to put that in.
Madam Mayor, Council President, we did consider that consent at the time. So that would have been a blanket consent for all of the homes that are hooked up to sewer at the point of when the property was subdivided.
Okay, thank you.
So as we move on throughout our history of the Southwest. In 2005 until about currently, the way that development happened in the Southwest was through what we called a county referral process. So Ada County has adopted Blueprint Boise and the previous comprehensive plan for lands in the area of impact. Ada County retains the, I guess, the right to dictate development in those areas. So they zone it, they do conditional use permits, they do all of the entitlement work in the county that is outside of the city limits. The overarching goals that they are kind of implementing are the city comp plan vision. So we would get referrals from Ada County. So we can say Charter Point, for example, is a really good example. It's a really large development that went in kind of around this time. And the way that the city got involved in it is we had it laid out as a certain designation on our land use map. And the applicant would have kind of worked with us just to talk about the vision and what we had, anticipated for the area, densities, housing type, any kind of amenities out there. And then they would submit their application to Ada County. Once they submit their application to Ada County, it would come to us through a county referral process. PDS staff would review that for consistency only with a comprehensive plan. Zoning ordinance does not apply. City zoning ordinance doesn't apply. And it would not go through the Planning and Zoning Commission. Those referrals came directly to City Council, and generally they would have a series of conditions of approval on them that would outline things that the city would like to see. A lot of times it was things like not having garage-dominated homes on the property. So moving setbacks for garages, pathway connections, alley-loaded product. It was really a way for us to provide a recommendation on a building form that, we really wanted to see in the area that we thought would be beneficial to the community. So those would go before City Council. We would send the recommendation back to Ada County, and they would either adopt or not adopt our conditions of approval. There wasn't a follow-up process to ensure that they did adopt those conditions of approval. We just assumed that they did, because generally those conditions of approval related to us extending sewer. At the time, our policy was, you will follow our recommended conditions of approval and you will get sewer. And that was basically it. So we were getting an awful lot of development between about 2005 and 2012 in the Southwest. And a lot of preliminary plats were going out there. It was almost entirely residential. Single family homes is mostly what we were seeing out there. We have a couple, like I said, there's a couple of commercial areas out there, but it was largely single family residential. And in 2013, we started to have some issues with this kind of relationship that we had. So the council directed Public Works to look at our sewer extension policy. And at that point, that's when we basically said, we're not going to be doing this county referral process anymore. If you want to develop anywhere in the area of impact, you need to come to the city and you need to find a path for annexation. Only then will we look at reviewing your application and allowing the entitlements to go on the property. So that's kind of a very short, quick overview of the history. I'll pause here for any questions if you guys have any more. No?
Madam Mayor, thank you so much, Jennifer, for that. Since council hit that pause, I can't think of very many properties that have come across our desk for annexation. Do you have any kind of general idea of how many have?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Woodings, it all but stopped entitlements in the Southwest. So we do have a lot of subdivisions and preliminary plats that were in the pipeline that we're running through and that hadn't finalized. Those finalized out. But since that time, we really haven't had almost any that I know of. But again, I haven't been in PDS for a little bit. So I think it's been a fairly low volume of things that have come in. And it's really kind of forced developers in the area to figure out a way to get annexed into the city, which is why you're starting to see like the Murio farms come in, and some of those other pieces that we have.
Great, thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Jennifer, how much land would you suggest is available for development in this piece? I mean, is there tons? Or is it
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Thompson, I wouldn't say tons. So if you consider Murio Farms and then like where Syringa Valley is, those are in the city limits. So if we take those out, we're really looking at some infill parcels that are within the Southwest. Some of the density in the Southwest is very low. So there are still parcels on 2, 5, 10 acre lots out here or homes that are on those lots. So in theory, you could redevelop a 10 acre parcel and you could get some good density on it, but it's all contingent upon the sewer service being available. But the last time I ran just some pretty general calculations, again, it was a while ago. It was probably like maybe 2,000 units that we could, go into the nooks and crannies out there. So that brings us to today and our current analysis of Southwest annexation. So, and Mike, your slide's next. So when we look at annexation of an area, the first question we have to answer is whether or not we have the consent to be able to do it. So as I mentioned, consent is defined as 50% plus one. We never really go down that low when we're doing annexations. Generally we look for like 57 to 60% consent. And this calculation was developed using both our implied consent that we have from before 2008, all written requests that we have for annexation. So all of those numbers, that's how we define consent. When we run through this calculation, what we do is we take the whole land area, we pull out all public parcels because those aren't considered in the actual calculation. And then we count the acreage of consent that we have. It is not based on parcels, it is based on acreage. And all of that criteria and that process that we go through is outlined in state code. So some of the considerations.
Jennifer, I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Did you say that this number also includes the implied consent that we used before 2008 that the legislature says we can't use?
Madam Mayor, it does include that number.
Does?
We can include implied consent before 2008 in our calculation.
Oh, the implied consent that we had before 2008.
Correct.
Gotcha. Okay.
It's just in 2008, the legislature said that we have to start requiring written consent
Great.
of annexation.
Madam Mayor. So Jennifer, in this, as I look at this map, I just want to make sure I'm reading it right. The areas in green do have consent, the areas in white do not.
Madam Mayor, Council President, that is correct.
And so the areas in white, especially to the kind of in the middle on the eastern portion and then the bottom on the southwestern portion, those two big, no, the ones that are developed, but in white, yeah, that one.
This one?
And then southwest.
Like this area.
Are you saying that in the time between 2008 and 2014, when we made the assumption that the county was following through and getting the consent written, that these did not? Because those were developed very clearly on sewer with an intent to get consent, right? Because they wouldn't be developed at those densities otherwise.
Madam Mayor, Council President, this area here, these are all half-acre lots, and I believe a lot of these were actually developed prior to kind of our 2000s relationship with the county. This area is largely all on septic also.
Oh, really?
It is. Mhm. Yeah,
Wow.
so a lot of this is on septic. It's really interesting to see lots this small that are actually still on septic, but they are.
Okay.
So we don't have consent for these parcels. One other point just to note is that as part of our enabling legislation, parcels that are over 5 acres are not considered to have consented. So all parcels that are over 5 acres are removed from this calculation. Unless we have written or some agreement to annexation for the parcels. So Public Works updates that fairly frequently on where we have written and then our implied consent that's been kept up to date for years. So just a couple of considerations in our current analysis of the Southwest. House Bill 389 has reduced our property tax new construction annexation value to 90%. So reducing the value by 10% does impact the calculation a good bit. And then Mike can probably speak to this a little bit better than I can. We'll exceed the 8% property property cap if we do this all in 1 year. So it would have to be split into multiple years in order to meet our requirement to stay under that 8% property cap. Since the area is largely built out, we don't have a lot of impact fee funding opportunities out there. And then just as a matter of implementation, once we certify an annexation, we have a gap in timing of 1 year before we can start to collect revenue on that annexation. So, but we have to provide services basically the next day. So we have to, I want to say like, put the services on a credit card for a year, but it's kind of something similar to that in that we have to front the money in order to be able to get the services out there. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike and he's going to just go over some of our inputs that we put into the model. Oh, wait. Oh, sorry. Just one other one. I just wanted to give some scale of comparison when we talk about property taxes and we do talk about the impact to property owners. We're generally looking at about a 30-35% impact on our property owners in the property taxes that they pay once they are in the city limits.
Madam Mayor, council members, as we look at this type of an analysis, as Jennifer just talked to a bit, we look at mainly the property tax and as well as other revenue sources. And then we look at, well, what costs of service would need to go in and see if the revenues can cover those services and their costs. And we have done some preliminary analysis. It's still early. We need to do some refinement, look at things. But when we really take a look at that size of a parcel and that many people, it does involve quite a bit of service additions. In discussions with police, historically, I think we've gotten by with a lower number of police per thousand. We start looking at what they really maybe should get to as we become a larger city. You can see that is perhaps 60 to 70 police staff, including officers, support staff, and supervisors, plus vehicles. For every 2 patrol officers you add or officers you add a vehicle. And then there is also certain startup costs and other things with that many employees, particularly police officers. And then that many police officers added may cause us to need more building space, perhaps somewhere down the southwest, given City Hall West is already getting close to capacity, if not at capacity. So there is some assumptions to work with as we look at cost to add. For fire, there would be a need for a new fire station down in that area. And as the slides get to here, perhaps more than that. But when you add a fire station, we also have an engine, and then we have staffing, and we have a fire academy to get the new staff to run the station. And the other thing with fire stations and police buildings is, as you're aware, we've had significant increases in costs in recent years for anything we build like that. In looking at what fire would do there, again, this is preliminary. We would probably need a rescue company, if not perhaps a truck company down there, which again adds more staff, more cost to put in fire service. There also would be a loss of a significant portion of the Whitney contract revenue, which fire currently gets, because some of that is the Whitney Fire District. Then looking at parks, there are 2 park sites down there, the Pearl Jensen and the Wrigley Parks. And the cost we would look at there is greening up both parks, adding amenities, and then maintaining those parks. And in particular, Pearl Jensen is a sizable park. Then also another amenity that parks would look to add is some canal connectivity, pathways and trails in that area. That's an important part of being able to get around, get to parks, pedestrian bikes, things like that. Then moving on to library, I believe there are 2 Ada County small branches down there. What we might do is look at putting in a branch library, a neighborhood library down there, potentially a bigger facility, along the lines of what we do in the city. If it is city, what is our level of service? So there's another facility which we may build or lease, then have operating costs. We would save some money on the Ada County contract that we pay, because right now, some of our citizens use those Ada County library branches down there. Then also just general staff, as we look more and more at when we add, say, police officers, that puts more demands on IT and finance and public safety. And just, we also see that there would be quite a few number, maybe 20, 25 employees we would add in support departments just to accommodate the operations and that many more people in the city. And then there could be a couple vehicles there as well. And then also just a couple of things to mention. If VRT funding is 5% of property tax, well, we've got a good chunk more a city, there would be more property tax. If we set aside 5% of that for VRT, there's some more cost. And then animal services contract, we currently pay that based on some kind of a population, and some of the county's costs there would probably come to the city if that still holds as far as that contract with Idaho Humane Society. And then last, and another thing that would likely come up is just streetlight additions. I understand, talking Public Works, that there aren't a lot of streetlights out there. There would be a need to put in perhaps many, many streetlights where those are desired, or that's the city service level. And once you have to put them in a retrofit, you're cutting asphalt, you're having to get things under the street. It's takes time, and it's a fair amount of cost. So those are some of the early assumptions we would have if we look at annexing that whole area, what revenues we have, and these are the types of costs assumptions that we would be working to refine to get at that analysis, and it is a lot of cost.
Madam Mayor. Thanks. Idaho state law is really not set up to annex already developed areas. It's set up to annex undeveloped land, and over time build up the both the ability to provide services and the tax revenue collected to support those. In an already annexed area, if I'm not mistaken, from what I understand, probably the biggest cost to catch up with on the immediate basis are public safety and both police and fire. In this case, isn't it true that without extra cost to the residents of this area, they receive urban levels of policing from the sheriff's department? That everywhere else, the sheriff's department provides urban levels of policing. They have a contract with, typically with a city, for instance, as they do with City of Eagle, to provide those services. There's no blame here. I'm not trying to say, bad county, bad sheriff's department. We have an area that's developed at urban levels of development, and it needs policing, and they're the ones in charge of that. My question around this is, to your knowledge, has anyone ever worked out an agreement with a county in Idaho to move into that annexation area in a less than overnight fashion? For instance, every annexation I've been a part of at the City of Boise to date, the day we annexed the land, the sheriff's department walked out. And we were required to provide services, especially at the police level, that we really didn't have the capacity to provide. And so if this were even possible, it seems to me that the only way that it would be possible would be if the county were willing to do that. At the end of the day, the benefit for the county and for the rest of the citizens of the county is that once that was accomplished, the county could actually reduce the size of their sheriff's department, and all county residents would save some money. But I'm just not aware of anyone who's ever done it.
Madam Mayor, Council Member, I have not heard of anything like that. I don't know if.
Second question, if I could, on the fire. My memory of our fire planning is that we would add a truck somewhere in the Southwest, but that because of the primarily residential nature of this part of the Southwest versus what will likely be fairly heavy industrial use on the eastern part of the Southwest, that that truck company would likely be added either on the edge, on the eastern edge, or into the industrial area. So as we talk about this, I just wondered, are you counting the cost of that truck in this portion of the area, or would it be shared with that more industrial portion, or how would that work?
Councilmember, good question. In the early discussions with fire, that has come up, that if you're looking at service level for city, it would be a truck. And I think looking at the other way is, as you stated, it's residential. So do you have the same need for that there? Where that could be on the east side, yeah, potentially that's where you have more need at some point. And we are going to see development there with Syringa is being constructed now. And so, yes, that could be the way that comes out with a fire station down there eventually, or going to the east, or, you know, at some point you get another fire station. But I think that is to be determined. And that's one reason we don't have a fire truck down there yet, is it's county and there just hasn't been that need. But fire would like to have that as a tool to provide service down there.
And then finally, if I might, Madam Mayor, I was one of the people who worked really hard to do the last annexation down here. It was very complicated, as Jennifer's alluded to, and since then have looked any number of times at ways that you might approach doing an annexation that makes some sense, both to the residents and to the city. And you know, absent some of these things that I just talked about, I got to a point where it seemed impossible to make work. And so having said that, we're at a point now where I think it's worthy of having a transparent discussion with the community about where we are and what's possible. And I appreciate, you know, this as a starting point, and I'm guessing that some of us will probably be pushing a little bit to get a little deeper on some of this as we go forward.
Yes, Council President, that is something we can work to refine and update this analysis to provide that.
Thank you.
I've got a question, just to follow up on that. Kind of on this theme of the state hasn't set up the laws in such a way that work for cities to annex already built areas. Can you talk, and there might be slides about the financial impact of this to the city. If that's next, that's great. But I'm wondering if you can talk also about the differences in impact fees. Of one, what impact fees could be used for, given that this is already built. Two, if they paid anything as impact fees and what that was, compared to if some of these areas had been built as and willingly annexed at the same time, what they would have paid for the services that some of these are, or some of which are impact fee eligible.
Yeah.
Madam Mayor, I have a series of slides on that particular topic.
Oh, great. Okay, all right.
But just one other point real quick to Council President Clegg's discussion. We have over the years looked at this in so many different ways. We've looked at chunking it up into, 4 sections, chunking it up into 10. There's just, it's never penciled from the city's perspective, but we have gone through a fairly intense and robust process internally to try to figure out a way if there is a path forward, largely because up until the 2014, or I think it was the 2014 annexation of the Northwest, we had been on a cadence of annexing about every 5 years. So we had 99 was a big one, 2004. And at that time, we were really looking at filling in the city limits on the north side of the freeway. So we were, getting all the way over to our impact area over there. So that was the cadence that we were on. And then we just sort of stopped. And that was kind of after 2004. And then when the Northwest annexation went through, that one was highly contentious as well. In the meantime, we did a series of 99 parcel annexations. So we can just do 99 parcels if they are surrounded by city limits. So we were picking up some, kind of bits and pieces around the city just to fill in a lot of those holes. But really the intent of this is to be able to provide uniform coverage and service within our city limits. It's very difficult for police to, service something where they're trying to figure out on a map if they are in the city or they are outside of it. A good example of that is like Simplot Sports Complex. Up until we annexed that a couple of years ago, Ada County was responding to that until we annexed it. And now BPD has been responding to that. So, the overarching theme is really in the delivery of service from the city perspective and to be able to provide a uniform level of service for all of our residents. So just to have a quick overview discussion of park impact fees. And this is specific to parks. As the city, within the city limits, we collect parks, police, and fire impact fees. We started collecting park impact fees in the 90s, and we started collecting police and fire impact fees in 2008. In 2008, when we started collecting those impact fees, we did go to Ada County and ask them to collect them on our behalf, and we were denied that request. So impact fees are just a one-time charge that the city uses in order to start to build out our level of service in area. It is collected when a builder applies for a building permit. So our relationship with Ada County now, if there is a building permit that is being pulled in our impact area, they will send the person pulling the permit to the city. They will pay us an impact fee, and that's different than what a city resident will pay. And I'll get into that in just a moment. And then we'll verify it back with Ada County, and then they'll move forward with the building permit in the county. So since 1997, we have collected local park impact fees of $4.3 million in this area, and those have gone to Peppermint and Molinar Parks. We are right now under construction at Molinar with amenities, so that's one of the later projects that's getting done. Peppermint was done after the 2004 annexation. So that was one of the commitments we made to the community at the time, was once we annex you, we will build this park, which we did complete. And then we have $6.2 million in regional park impact fees that have been collected in this area, and that's since 1997. So it's gone up and down kind of over the years as we've had peaks and valleys in the growth pattern. We've collected like $300,000 a year in some years, and in some really light years, we've collected $60,000. So it's really kind of all over the board as far as the consistency associated with it. But as I mentioned, they have not, in addition to not adopting our police and fire impact fees, they have not updated our park impact fees since 2006. When we adopted our 2006 impact fees, we set that collection rate at 50% of the cost of our capital improvement plan. So you can see where we're having a compounding impact of all of these, I don't want to say decisions, but these deficiencies, right? So we're trying to, it's almost like at this point, we're trying to catch up. So I think the thought process at the time was we don't want to discourage development with kind of punitive fees, and that the city would kind of make up the difference as far as our capital improvement plan at the time. One important point to note is that in order for a project to be funded through impact fees, it must be called out in our capital improvement plan. So like Margaritio Park's never been in a capital improvement plan. Pearl Jensen, never been in a capital improvement plan. So that's where we get to this kind of perplexing issue of annexing already built areas, because we're not going to be collecting impact fees for them. But in the event that we do annex them, we will need to be investing in capital infrastructure out there. So this is a chart of what our current impact fees are for residents within the city limits. In the Southwest planning area, so that's everything north of Victory Road, and then everything south of Victory Road. So again, this is when a building permit is pulled, and the upper chart is based on our most recent impact fee plan and our capital improvement plan. And then the lower one is based on our 2006 impact fee calculation. So you can see where, again, this compounding impact of like not getting those impact fees updated is starting to impact actually our revenue. We are currently going through an update to our capital improvement plan. We are required under Idaho State Code to update that every 5 years. So we are in that cycle right now where we are looking at all of our different park facilities, our service levels, the costs for park improvements, and police and fire are going through the same exercise. Those capital improvement plans and setting those fees all run through our Development Impact Fee Advisory Committee. And they meet frequently to review our methodology, to review the impact fees, the collection, the how we spend those dollars and where we spend those dollars across the city.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
About this? So you have here the difference in impact fees based on the decisions made at various points in time. And so there's a big difference between those that live in the city and those that don't right now. However, didn't you also say that in order for a park to have been planned and to be eligible for these fees, it would have had to been placed in the capital improvement plan back in 97, 2000, whenever, as this discussion was being had?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, that's correct. It would have been in the 2006 update to our capital improvement plan because that's the last time that Ada County has updated those impact fees. So it's those projects that would have been eligible for that funding.
At the time that they updated the fees?
Correct.
Okay.
And just to speak to the timing a little bit, Molinar has been called out in, I don't know, I think at least the last 3 capital plans. So it's always been intended to be developed on some schedule. I think we got behind on it a little bit, but that's mostly where that's where almost all of those fees have gone.
Okay, thanks.
Aside from Peppermint.
Madam Mayor.
Yeah.
Thanks. Jennifer, isn't it also true that when the city of Boise updated our impact fees for parks, we are, I think maybe, if not the only one in the state, certainly the only city in the valley that has districts where impact fees collected, at least those identified for local or community facilities, are spent within that district, and only a portion of the impact fees are spent citywide on regional facilities. Is that true?
Madam Mayor, Council President, that is correct. So we have 5 local park planning areas. And the intention of the park planning area is that, and this is specifically true for kind of our historical methodology of how we serve residents through parks, is that residents are served by a hierarchy of parks. So neighborhood parks are intended to serve residents within half a mile. Community parks are intended to serve residents within a mile, and regional parks serve residents within the entire city. So the local impact fee, specifically the Southwest local impact fee, is intended to cover the cost of local and community parks. Now, like a local park is considered 7 to 10 acres. A community park is 20 acres. And then regional facilities kind of go up from there. So like Pearl Jensen would be considered a regional facility if anything ever happened with that Maguerdio regional facility.
Okay, so as an example, if we had an impact fee schedule and ordinance like the Ada County Highway District, we would collect the same impact fees all over the city and we could spend them wherever we wanted. There wouldn't be identified that they'd need to be spent in district. But in our case, we've identified that we need to do that, and that's an important factor.
Madam Mayor, Council President, that's correct.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Good segue. So as I mentioned, regional parks, which is what the Maguerdio parcel is classified as. Just kind of some background on them. These are our large ribbon of jewels parks that are generally located along the river. And then we have our sports complexes too. And Maguerdio was envisioned to be one of these sports complexes. But one of the probably the more important aspects of our regional parks is that we develop them through a series of partnerships. And I don't think we have a single one of them in the system where we haven't had some sort of partnership to develop that park. So Marion Williams is a good example. We got the land donated for that. And then we also had funding dedicated to that through the development of, through like the Brighton group out there. Ann Morrison, that was built almost entirely by donations. Esther Simplot was built like a good bit by donations. We had a small impact fee role in that park in developing it. But impact fees are generally a smaller funding source than what we what we're able to partner with our community partners on in developing these parks. The cost of these is high. I mean, there's just no way around it. These are large facilities. They're intended to serve 240,000 residents of the city. So they have, lots of parking, lots of amenities, sometimes lots of water that we have a really hard time keeping clean. They have lots of stuff in there for residents to use. And we love it when people use them. And, we want people to use them to death. That's how we, that's what we're really good at maintaining usually, except for water in some instances. But, we really do intend on the whole community to be able to access them and to be able to use them. They often come with a downside though. Residents in Columbia Village aren't super huge fans of Simplot Sports Complex on a Saturday. They get, I don't know, probably 4,000 cars parked on their streets, and they do everything in their power to try to get out of their driveways. But sometimes parents just are like, want to be right next to the field. And so they're not this, they just do have some drawbacks that a lot of our residents start to experience. Esther Simplot's a great example. That park is underparked. Like, you cannot get a parking spot in there after 11 o'clock any day of the week. And it's because people want to drive up and get right into whatever it is that they're doing. And it's hard to lift a kayak. I mean, things like that. But, they really do impact the neighbors around them. The 30th Street neighborhood experienced a lot of impacts when we built this facility, a lot of things that they weren't used to. So we really did have to go through an effort to work with the neighbors and try to figure out a way to make it, so it didn't have a negative impact on them. But these facilities are intended to bring lots of people to them. And that, sometimes there are just some downsides to that. So the McGurdio parcel was master planned in like 1997 as a regional sports complex. So this is an awful lot of field space. And this is what's been called for the last 24 years. And at the time when, we went through this process, there was the assumption that we would need all this field space and that we would continue to grow, but also that we would be annexing on that cadence so that we would be able to collect impact fees and we would start being able to pay for it. But, that didn't happen. So, like I said, this is a really large facility. This is where our cost estimating, like right now, is between 30 and 35 million just to green it up. This is expensive. There's no way around it. There's no way to, just develop a portion of it or only develop a portion, like a piece of a parking lot, because when we develop something like this, we have to develop all of the infrastructure first and foremost. So we have to run sewer to the site. We have to get all of the irrigation set up. We have to make sure that the water delivery service is in place. And from that perspective, that's where we get to our kind of green up phase. And that's usually the turf, irrigation, trees, pathways, and parking. That way we can do it in a more economical fashion so that we are running all of those utilities. And then we are actually getting something out there for the public. So when we look at a project, we really want to look at it holistically and how can we, achieve the economy of scale that we need to when we are going in and greening up a project. Our costs right now are higher than they have ever been. That is without a doubt. You guys have seen it. I'm before you all the time asking for more money. But, even kind of at the lowest point in our economy and, like the 2008 times, I still think the cost estimate for green up was like 15 to 18 million. So we're not, which is in line with what our cost estimating has looked like for pretty much all of our other projects. So it's just to say that, when we're looking at phasing things, the way that we have figured out the cadence of development for us really does work for us from a kind of the economic perspective in trying to achieve those economies of scale.
So Jennifer, I got to ask, if they drew it, why didn't it ever get included in the CIP?
Madam Mayor, that's like the $33 million question. I don't know. I've gone back through the records. I've tried to find anything, but I think absent annexation, we have not developed parks outside of city limits. We don't. It has been the city's policy for the last 20 something years. And so I think if we were looking at, if there had been a, kind of keeping on that 5-year cadence of annexing, the story might be different, but it's almost like we got so far behind, we weren't ever able to catch up again, I guess is what I would say, but I'm really not sure why it wasn't included. So,
Mayor.
oh, sorry.
Excuse me. So real quick, I'm trying to kind of sort this question out in my head as I'm asking it. And I feel like that last slide was the one probably to ask it on. So typically we're going to fund our regional parks through mostly private partnerships. And we've seen that with, you just identified several of them. And those private partnerships consist of oftentimes the donation of the land in addition to donations as well to provide the green up cost, or is it the land donation that is usually the larger part of that funding?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Halliburton, it's a lot of times it's a combination of both, especially for the larger ones. There have been some where I think on Esther Simplot, they donated almost all of the cost of construction for it. We had some remediation issues that had to be taken care of that the city picked up the tab on, but it's largely when we're going out to develop a new site, which we don't actually do that frequently. Like Marianne Williams and Esther Simplot are the two most recent that we've done. And there were significant contributions from the families.
And Madam Mayor, just to follow up with that. So with this particular one with Mergudio Park, what we might, if we were comparing it to other ones, we might see both the property get donated as well as a partner come on board to help fund a lot of the creation of the park. And because that property was donated, but there wasn't necessarily that additional partner to help pay for a lot of those funds, that could possibly be one of the reasons it hasn't been pushed forward or developed as well. Would that be a correct statement?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Halliburton, that would be a correct statement.
Okay, thank you.
However, yeah, go ahead.
Madam Mayor, if I could follow up, the property wasn't donated. The property was originally purchased by the airport and then repurchased by the park department.
Yeah, I guess to that, just one more question as well. So when we look at one of our other more recent regional parks, I'm thinking of the one in Northwest Boise, the Optimist Fields.
Mhm.
That would have been another one where we had a private partner, the Optimist, who helped fund a lot of that project.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Halliburton, that's correct. They funded almost everything out there.
Okay, great. And thank you for the clarification.
Right, go ahead.
So as I mentioned, just a few key points to consider with this whole project is that the first and foremost, this parcel is not located within the city limits. So the applications have been submitted to PDS to get it annexed into the city limits. And that's where we'll be before the Planning and Zoning Commission on August 9th to extend the city limits. And then, that no funding had ever been identified or that the property was never included in any capital improvement plan. I think that's really kind of the crux of why we're at where we're at today. But once the annexation goes through the Planning and Zoning Commission, it will be before you guys probably in September, I'm thinking, for the public hearing for the final decision on that piece of it.
On the annexation.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. And so then I just a couple of high level next steps. On the 20th, in order to move any discussions of the land swap forward, we will need to remove the restrictive covenants that are on the parcel. So those covenants are, they're basically deflating the value of the parcel because you can't do anything with it other than build a park, right? So while we're behind the scenes working on recalculating the value of the property based on some of our external factors, like what land is going for in the area right now, there have been a couple of recent sales that are going to impact the value of this property. We can't have any real discussion with those covenants on that property. And as we've
Jennifer, I want to make sure though that the appraisal that we've asked as part of this due diligence process is looking at the value of the land as if the covenants were removed.
Madam Mayor, that's correct.
Okay, because that's the true value of the land.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Great.
And then on the 20th, at this point, we're looking at having the surplus resolution on the agenda also at the same time to set the surplus hearing with the kind of steps that we're taking in the background on the appraisal and trying to get through some of those that date may need to move. And then, so August for planning and zoning, and then September for you guys on the manner of the annexation and map amendment. Once we get kind of the background due diligence that we're working on right now, I'll have some more clarification on when we're looking at the public hearing for the surplus piece of it.
Madam Mayor.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Jennifer, I believe you mentioned that some years back, you looked at the cost of building that park out and it was something like 17 million, but if you said that, I think that number, but in today's dollars, it would be substantially more, as I understand it, perhaps double that.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Thompson, our preliminary cost estimate for it was around 33 million
33.
in its depicted state on the master plan. So whether or not that's what we would actually build, we actually have an internal process where if we have a master plan that's older than 5 years, we'll go out to the public and update it. So we'll go through that process with neighbors to figure out if it's still what people are looking for and what they're interested in seeing. We do that when we do have capital dollars in the near future,
Okay.
so that we can make sure that we plan our construction project in accordance with whatever the master plan is that the neighbors have agreed to.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor. So Jennifer, I think the whole discussion for me brings up some really interesting questions. Right now, we don't have any regional parks outside of the center core of the city that aren't sports parks. Is that right? I guess Marianne Williams
Marion Williams.
is the only one.
Mhm.
All the others are pretty close to the core, except for the regional parks that are sports parks.
That's correct.
Chuck McDevitt, Optimist, and Simplot.
Mhm.
Okay, so second question then, as you've gone through this process, I've begun thinking about what's the need for those kinds of non-sports park, larger park facilities, and is that another question that we need to start asking ourselves?
Madam Mayor, Council President Clegg, it is probably a question that we need to look at. Our regional parks generally have almost like a preservation component to them. So like Marion Williams, Esther Simplot, they all have like river corridor, like riparian habitat, things like that, that we really do look at. They're more natural. A lot of them are more natural areas instead of just manicured grass. And as we are going through kind of our capital planning and what we have on the horizon, we really are looking at, whether just turf and parking lots is the way to go as far as like what they really need. And are we able to stack benefits of, looking at habitat preservation and preserving open spaces in different forms. So like Hyatt Hidden Lakes is a really good example. I mean, that was a formal gravel pit that we were able to end up turning into a pretty lovely facility that people are generally pretty happy with. So, we're kind of looking at as a city, our needs changing when we look at what kinds of parks we're developing. We just cut the ribbon on Bowler, where we did have 20 acres. We only developed 6 acres of it. We were able to preserve some pretty outstanding sage stands that are probably a couple hundred years old. And that was really exciting for us. And we were able to be pretty compact about what we put in there and preserve what's around it. So our model of park serving people it's evolving and it's changing. And I don't know that the master plan from 1997 would necessarily equate today to what our users are looking for.
So thank you. That leads to the second question, which is, given this next steps that you've given us, as a council, recognizing that in order to have a larger discussion about this particular parcel, we have to do something about the covenants that are on there. I guess in my mind, I wonder if we shouldn't take some time to think about something besides just removing them, and at least some time to think about whether or not we should revise them, or at least put some idea in whatever we adopt that conforms to what we believe as we have this conversation is the future of that area. And that would include housing, at least in my mind at this point, certainly as a highest and best need for a lot of pieces of land in this valley at this moment, but it also includes recognizing the community values out there and wondering what it is that we should ensure gets preserved, if you will. So the question is this: if we chose not to act on the covenants next week, what could be a process to determine how to move that forward. Not suggesting that we stop, but maybe a little more process around that. I know I'm catching you off guard with this. And if you don't have an answer, just say so. That's great. I'm just kind of thinking out loud as well.
Madam Mayor, Council President Clegg, I don't have an answer. I'd have to think about it and try to come back with something that would present you guys with some potential options for how to both move forward, but consider some of the things that we've talked about this evening.
Madam Mayor.
Yeah, I think one more and then we've got to.
Thank you, Jennifer. Something about seeing that all drawn out, I think I'm starting to understand why people are upset. I think I understand why people are upset. Because I think prior to seeing that, when I kept hearing, we were promised, but to actually have pen to paper and actually have that visualization, starting to understand a little bit. Is that unusual for something to get that far into the, I don't even know the right word, the imagination part where you actually put pen to paper to try to visualize something and put it down so people can look at it and not put it in the capital improvement plan?
Madam Mayor, Council Pro Tem Sanchez, we have a plan very similar for Pearl Jensen. So I would say it was fairly standard for the time that they went through this process and, looking at the existing conditions and what was being called for in the area. So it's kind of specific to the Southwest that we actually do have this.
So would the unusual part be that it just went on this long without any sort of resolution or movement forward? And this is not to take away from Council President Clegg's efforts 20 years ago, but is that the part that's unusual?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sanchez, the fact that it's gone on this long and it hasn't been revisited is also very unusual because, as I mentioned, when we try to look at stuff every 5 years to see if it's still current and it's still relevant. So that hasn't happened. So
Okay.
I'd say both be actually, let's just say the whole thing is highly unusual.
And I just want to thank you, Jennifer, for your efforts as well as your department, because at the end of the day, we also have to be good stewards of the taxpayers, of folks who live within the city limits. And it sounds like some decisions were made that we're now all having to deal with. And I'm hoping this is going to be the beginning of a resolution. Thank you for your efforts.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thank you all very much. We are going to recess for about 27 minutes and then be back here at 6.